In this video, I'm going to show you the family trees of the Hashemite and Saudi dynasties, the two most important royal houses in the Middle East today. I'll be referring to my Asian royal family trees chart, which shows the connection between the Hashemites and the Prophet Muhammad. But mostly I'll be starting with the events that occurred after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and then tracing these two families to the current generation. This video is part of a two-part collaboration with Hikmah History, who will be going into more detail on the events that occurred following the fall of the Ottomans. You can find a link to his video in the description or on screen at the end. So there are currently 7 countries in the Middle East that can be classified as monarchies. The two that we are going to look at today are both kingdoms, the Kingdom of Jordan and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There is one other kingdom, and that is Bahrain. However, Bahrain is more the size of an emirate, which is what it was prior to 2002. So that's why it's shown with a smaller crown symbol. On the other hand, I've shown Oman with a large crown symbol, even though it's not a kingdom. That's because it's a sultanate, and a sultan is pretty much the equivalent of a king. So really, these are the 3 larger size monarchies, and these are the smaller ones. Kuwait and Qatar are both independent emirates, headed by an emir, which is basically the equivalent of what's called a sovereign prince in Europe. And then there's the United Arab Emirates, which consists of 7 emirates, but is considered a single country. About 100 years ago, the situation was quite a bit different. The Ottoman Empire had dominated the Middle East for about 500 years, but by the time World War I rolled around, it was on its last legs. This map, made by Siawish from the Al-Muqaddimah channel, shows the borders of the Ottoman Empire at the start of the war. And then this one shows the situation at the end of the war. This area here, called the Hijaz, includes the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. It broke free from the Ottomans during what's called the Arab Revolt. That revolt was led by Sharif Hussein, the founder of the Hashemite dynasty. He actually declared himself king of the Arab countries, as well as later the new caliph. But in reality, he was only the king of Hijaz. Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq were actually controlled by the British, and Syria was controlled by the French. Additionally, a new power was starting to grow in an area known as Najd. The emir of that region was a man named Ibn Saud, the founder of the modern Saudi state. So with that background, let's now go back to the family tree. At the top are the 2 men that I just mentioned. Hussein, who was originally the Sharif of Mecca, but became the king of Hijaz after the Arab Revolt, and Ibn Saud, the emir of Najd. Let's start with the Hashemites. The Hashemites are supposedly direct male line descendants of Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. If we go to the simplified version of the tree, shown on my Asian Royal Family Trees poster, we can trace this dotted line. And it goes all the way up to the top of the poster. And here we can see how the Hashemites connect into the family of the Prophet Muhammad. So Muhammad did not have any biological sons who lived into adulthood. And the only daughter of his who is known to have had descendants is Fatima. She married Muhammad's cousin and close companion Ali. Sunni Muslims consider Ali to have been the 4th caliph, and Shiite Muslims consider him to have been the first imam. Fatima and Ali had two main sons, Hassan and Hussein. Hassan, who was the eldest, is the ancestor of the Hashemite dynasty, which we are looking at today, whereas Hussein became the ancestor of the Fatimid dynasty, as well as the modern-day Aga Khans. So let's go back to the house of Hashim. Hussein had 4 sons, all of whom were involved in the Arab Revolt and the subsequent fall of the Ottoman Empire. Faisal was the first to be offered his own crown and was declared king of Syria in 1920. Interestingly, he was portrayed in the famous movie Lawrence of Arabia by the same actor who played the original Obi-Wan Kenobi. But Faisal's reign in Syria was extremely short, as the French ended up taking full control of Syria just a few months later. The British therefore offered him the title King of Iraq instead, although the British still retained some control over the country throughout most of his reign. Meanwhile, his brother Abdullah had been named Emir of Transjordan, which was initially a British protectorate. He had actually been offered the crown of Iraq as well, prior to Faisal, but he turned it down. He did, however, become king in 1946, which is when Transjordan became independent and was renamed the Kingdom of Jordan. Hussein's eldest son, Ali, was not offered a separate crown because he was his father's heir in Hijaz. Ali became king there in 1924 when his father stepped down, but his reign was a short one. There had already been conflict between the Haashimites and the growing Saudi state of Najd, which was now a sultanate. And in 1925, the Saudis officially conquered Hijaz and incorporated it into their territory. At that point, Ibn Saud took the title King of Najd and Hijaz, the two kingdoms which then merged in 1932 to become Saudi Arabia. After the conquest, Hussein moved to Jordan and Ali moved to Iraq. Both men died in the 1930s, and after the death of Hussein, no one has seriously claimed the title of caliph since. In Iraq, Faisal was eventually succeeded by his only son, Ghazi, who reigned for 6 years before dying in a car accident at age 27. He had only one son, who was only 4 years old at the time. So Abdullah, the only son of Ali, took over as regent until Faisal became of age. He was known as Faisal II. But in 1958, there was a coup in Iraq, and both Faisal II and Abdullah, the former regent, were brutally assassinated, thus ending both this branch and this branch of the Hashemite dynasty. From 1958 onwards, Iraq has been a republic. However, monarchists consider the line to have passed to Hussein's youngest son, Zayd. Zayd has a son named Ra'ad, who is still living, and is currently the Hashemite heir to both the thrones of Iraq and Syria. After he dies, his titles will pass to his eldest son, Zayd Ra'ad, who is currently a law professor in the US and who has had a very high-profile career as a diplomat. He recently served both as president of the UN Security Council and as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let's now look at Jordan, which is the only country where the Hashemite dynasty still reigns. The first king, Abdullah I, was assassinated by a Palestinian in 1951, a few years after the State of Israel was declared. During the Arab-Israeli War, Jordan had managed to capture the West Bank, and Abdullah was keen on simply incorporating the Palestinian areas into Jordan, rather than helping to create a separate Palestinian state. It was rumored that he was engaged in secret peace talks with Israel, and this is likely what led to his assassination. He was succeeded by his son Talal, but Talal was deposed after just 1 year due to a mental illness, which was likely schizophrenia. His eldest son, Hussein, was just 16 at the time and ruled initially with a regency council. Hussein was actually with his grandfather the day that Abdullah I was assassinated, and Hussein even took a bullet. However, it deflected off a medal he was wearing, and therefore he survived. In fact, he ended up having a long 46-year reign. During that time, he married 4 times and had children with all 4 wives. Only his eldest son is shown here, the current king of Jordan, Abdullah II. Hussein's first 2 marriages ended in divorce. Dina went on to marry a prominent member of the PLO, and she actually just passed away last year. Muna, who is still living, is British by birth and was originally named Antoinette. Aliyah died in a helicopter crash many decades ago, and Queen Noor, who is also still living, is American by birth and was originally named Lisa. Her father, who was of Syrian descent, was an important figure in early commercial aviation history. The current king is married to Queen Rania, who was born in Kuwait and is of Palestinian descent. They have 2 sons and 2 daughters. Their eldest child is Crown Prince Hussein, who is currently 25. Eventually, he is likely to become King Hussein II. Okay, let's now turn our attention to the Saudi dynasty. Although he is usually referred to as Ibn Saud, which simply means descendant of Saud, his regnal name was actually King Abdul Aziz. He reigned until 1953, and since then, every king of Saudi Arabia has been one of his sons. This makes it a rather unique monarchy. If you follow this channel regularly, you'll know that most monarchies follow some form of primogeniture, which usually means that the succession proceeds vertically from eldest son to eldest son and so forth. In contrast, the Saudi dynasty uses agnatic seniority, which means that the succession proceeds horizontally from eldest brother to next eldest brother and so forth until there's no one left in that generation. Ibn Saud is thought to have had 22 wives and at least 40 sons. Now, the succession didn't always go according to strict birth order. Sometimes individuals were skipped at the discretion of whoever was the current king. Things were particularly messy at the very beginning. There was a rivalry between the 2 eldest surviving sons, and eventually Faisal took control through political maneuvering and had Saud deposed. He then ended up assassinated by one of his brother's sons before things finally stabilized during the reigns of the next 2 kings, Khalid and Fahd. During their tenures, oil money poured into the country, and Saudi Arabia became very wealthy. During the reign of the 6th king, Abdullah, a special council was formed, and new rules were set for choosing a successor, which makes sense considering that the number of brothers in this generation was quickly getting lesser and lesser. Basically, what was decided was that all the sons and grandsons of Ibn Saud would now get to vote on who the crown prince would be. Abdullah actually ended up outliving 2 of his crown princes, one of whom was his younger brother, Prince Nayef. And therefore, it was his 3rd crown prince, his younger brother Salman, who ended up succeeding him. Salman is the current king of Saudi Arabia and is 84 years old. Initially, the son of former crown prince Nayef, named Muhammad, was chosen as the new crown prince. However, in 2017, King Salman removed Muhammad and named his own son, also named Mohammed, as the new crown prince. The special council formally voted to approve the change, but it seems like this was something that the king simply decreed. It also appears as though the new crown prince, nicknamed MBS, is the real power behind the throne. So if and when he becomes the new king, there might be more changes ahead. In any case, it would be the first time that a grandson of Ibn Saud, as opposed to a son, would be king. And it would be the first time that Saudi Arabia would have a much younger king. Finally, I should mention that these two families are custodians of some of the world's most holy religious sites. When Ibn Saud took control of the Hijaz, he became the new custodian of Mecca, and his successors continue to hold this role to this day. But the Haashimites are custodians of the holy sites in Jerusalem, including both the Muslim holy sites and the Christian ones, such as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They have held that position since 1924. Okay, so that was a look at the two most important Islamic dynasties in the world today. Make sure you follow the link on screen to watch the video by Hikmah History. Thanks for watching.